Twitter in many ways is a little bit of a maligned social software tool, I think. It's not always given quite the respect it deserves. I personally really like Twitter. I use it a lot, and I'm going to be self-confessed here. I have 4 different Twitter accounts, and I'll just tell you a little bit about them. One is my business account as a consultant. One, I'm also a student in my other life, and so I keep one Twitter account where I keep my research. I have one account which has no followers, and I follow no one, and it's almost, I treat it like a diary. And I have another account, which is one that, ironically, I'm actually paid to manage for somebody else. Not a lot, but it's really interesting looking at accounts from other people's perspectives. So that's my different relationships with Twitter, and it really prompted me to think that with my different relationships with Twitter, what I've realized is it's very important with Twitter that you define what your role is and what your purpose is. And I say this because I've seen this done challengingly a few times, particularly if you are maybe running your kiosk or you're running something that's with a sort of a community or business focus in mind, but you inadvertently mix that up with your personal senses of things. And that can be in 2 ways. It can either be the tweets that you make are based on your personal bias rather than that of your organization, or even down to the level that the people you follow are based on your personal bias rather than that of your organization. And I'll give you an example that I came across recently. Was an organization where, I won't tell you what it is because that would embarrass them, but the person that was running it clearly mistook those 2 things together. So if anyone was vetting the organization and they popped in to have a look at the people they follow, which does happen, I have to say that people's credibility is often based when someone will take a look at who you choose to follow. And this person not only had the usual range of not-for-profits and government organisations, but they were also following a load of soap opera stars. And so it sort of has a factor of starting to look at your credibility to a level. So I really would urge you to think about the purpose that you're using an individual Twitter account for, rather than just the fact that it's a Twitter and it can be for everything. So I noticed there someone else has 6. Well done. But I think it's really important that when you're setting up the account, you have a really good think about what the purpose of the account is and where you sit from the perspective of the manager of that account. I've given this session a hashtag just for the sake of easiness. I've just given a BBFS, which is Broadband for Seniors. So if you do have a Twitter account that's sitting on the side of you there, I've got mine open, and you feel like tweeting to that hashtag, please feel free to do that. If you've got no idea what I'm talking about, hang tight, and we'll get to that shortly. So I've thrown together a little bit of an agenda for this afternoon, and I've tried to keep it fairly general. So please feel free to jump around if anyone has questions at any point, or we'll stop at the end of each section and have some discussion or questions at the end of each one. What I will tell you is that when, and if you've done web conferences before, you'll certainly appreciate this, when you're presenting and moving things like slideshows forward, it's often very difficult to keep an eye on the text chat. So I'm not going to be doing that. I'm not very good at multitasking. But I really would urge you to use the text because it's a great way of communicating amongst the group and throw your ideas up, but I'm not necessarily going to be looking at it for questions right now, but we will stop and we'll take your questions as we go. So those are the agenda item points that I've thrown up, and say at the end, quite happy to throw in anything else that anyone wants to talk about. And please feel free to get tweeting onto that hashtag. Okay, so why Twitter is my second favourite social media tool. There's a reason I'm saying it's my second favourite. It's because my first favourite, I decided when I was putting this together, is whatever's most relevant at the time. And I sat back this week and I was listening to or watching through email poor old Catherine trying to schedule a meeting amongst a group of about 6 people. And that's something in one of my other roles that I have the same pain of trying to do on a regular basis. And there's a tool called Doodle. And Doodle is a scheduling tool which just saves my life so often. So when the time is appropriate, I'm going to say Doodle's my first favorite social media tool. Another one I love is called About Me. And so when the time is right for that, that's my favorite social media tool. So I'm not going to come down on what my first one is, but I will say that across the board, Twitter is my second. I like it because it's quick. I don't know if that means that I'm lazy. I don't know what that says about me. But in Twitter, you're limited to 140 characters. So it's something that's quick. It's easy to do. I love that I can use it on my phone. As I say, I'm a consultant. I have several different organizations that I work with, and I move around a lot. So I tend to think of my phone as being the equivalent of my office. It contains all the things that a normal office would do. And so to be able to have multiple users of Twitter on my phone, as I say, I run 4 different Twitter accounts. On my phone, they just sit as one app, so I can jump between the accounts. There has been times, I will admit, where I have retweeted myself. But it's something that works incredibly conveniently. Twitter, to me, I'm going to say it's not too much advertising. Increasingly, there is advertising, but I get the sense with Twitter that they haven't quite figured out yet how to make any money. It's not like Facebook where you're inundated and you're analyzed constantly through the algorithm as to what suits you and how they can sell to you. Twitter, I mean, obviously there is that. There is paid tweets, but I don't feel it quite as, I don't know, a little bit overwhelming as I do in Facebook. And it seems to me, I don't know if it's just my perception, that Facebook has just gone into hyperdrive with the way that they are placing advertising at the moment. I'm not really a big Facebook fan, I will say. But Twitter is a little bit less intense than that. I do like the fact that it also has a lot of flexibility. So while you're limited to 140 characters, there's also a lot of little add-ons. So if you've just got a point that you've just got to make, there's another program called Twitter Longer. And so you can put a link to that where you can have your rant if you need to. You can also link your Twitter and your Facebook, so you only have to post something once if you want it to go to a variety of different media. So it does have a level of flexibility that I kind of like. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about how we connect with Twitter. I don't really want to go into the nuts and bolts of Twitter. I know I looked through these webinars from some time ago, and there was a really nice introduction to Twitter that somebody else did that I looked at, and it looked like a really good introduction. So maybe if you're not familiar with the real basics, maybe that's something that, Catherine, we might share the link to the previous one just to get people going on it, and so we don't have to go back over that ground again. But basically with Twitter, what you're connecting on is things that suit you. So if you reference back to what I was saying before, that you're choosing the things that suit the organization or the person that is your Twitter persona at that time. So what me, Deb Littlehales, in my family life might follow might be very, very different to what my D Littlehales professional account might follow, and is very, very different than the one that I'm paid to manage follows, and very different again from the one that my university student, Debbie Littlehales, follows. So you can set you choose to follow whatever it is that suits the account of the time. What I love about Twitter when you're connecting is that there's a really good function for checking news and headlines. I was thinking of an example the other day. I don't know if you recall, a couple of years ago there was a plane that was in New York and it landed on the Hudson River. And when the plane landed, there was a ferry of commuters that was crossing the river at the time, and they were pulling people out of this plane, and I think there was no casualties. What was extraordinary about that incident, if you're a Twitter person, is that the news broke on Twitter way before it broke on any sort of news outlet, because it was during commuter time, so there was people on their phones, with their Twitter accounts out, and they were tweeting that there was a plane that seemed to be getting low in the water. There was a plane that had landed on the river. So the Twitterazzi, as it were, actually jumped the news cycle on that one quite significantly. And I find now that I'm actually tending to look at Twitter for my news quite a lot of the time. I follow a couple of news sites. I follow Al Jazeera, I follow the BBC News, The Guardian, and Sydney Morning Herald. And so I'll often be able to get the news headlines in a much quicker way than I would be if I was trying to surf the web. So it's something that I quite like the use of there. I'm also a bit of a travel junkie, and so I follow people like Lonely Planet, which just put up such enticing stuff that I just love to look at as well. And it's usually me planning my next holiday when I'm on it. Okay, I want to just touch on the use of the hashtag because I can see it's something that a few people are interested in. So basically a hashtag is a filing cabinet, if we want to just put it into real world terms. If you imagine it as being a filing cabinet that's going to store things of interest. So if I was actually taking a look earlier about what the biggest hashtags were for last year. So the biggest ones were things like Baby George, when sorry, I can't remember, the royal couple. There's my royalist leanings for you. When the baby was born, thank you, Catherine, Baby George, there you go. That was the biggest hashtag of the year last year. So that was people that were making comment on the birth of that child, and they were tagging it as Baby George, so that if anyone wanted to look at that, you'd be able to search Baby George, and that would be everybody's comments. I imagine probably the biggest this year is something like the FIFA World Cup, and if you were following the World Cup, there was just great commentary through FIFA.